This was a big win. As we told our guys, it was a one-game season tonight, just from the standpoint of we knew we had 6 days off afterwards, and the schedule we've been on. And to their credit, they did a tremendous job of laying it all on the line.
Thad Matta talking about his Buckeyes, Bishop and Rothman, Anthony Rothman, Bobby Carpenter, and now the voice of the Buckeyes, Paul Keels. Welcome in, buddy. You got a little rest this weekend, I imagine.
It was nice to have a 3-day weekend. Actually got to go to the hockey game Saturday night. So this first year as a season ticket holder for the Blue Jackets.
Wait, you ended the streak. Oh, so you
then started the losing streak Saturday.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So
it was your fault. All right, no, I'm kidding, Paul.
Yeah.
Are you a big hockey guy?
You know what? I grew up watching a lot of minor league hockey in Cincinnati with some of the teams you had there. So yeah, and I've really enjoyed. I've split season tickets with relatives this year and kind of work it out around basketball schedule and football schedule, but yeah, I love going to see it in person.
Got to get you on the Zamboni. Keels riding around.
Absolutely, we'll get you out there. That'll be good.
Hey,
Big Daddy,
you just get into the little rumble seat there and you wave to the crowd. You're good.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right.
I'll tell you, this team needed that win. There's no doubt about it. I think if they lose that game to Illinois, and that game came down to the wire, if they lose that game, then I don't know where you go. Because the way Thad talked about it afterwards, if he did pitch it that way to his guys, 1-game season, we got to get this done, kind of thing, just focus on this. If they don't get it done, then where do you turn? How much do you think they gain from just ending the losing streak?
An awful lot. And when you look back at the 4 games they lost in a row, you can find good stretches in all of those. Nobody wants to hear about the positives, though. I think you can look at the last 2, the game with Nebraska and the game with Minnesota. If those are home games, they probably win. They're road games, the crowd gets into it, et cetera, et cetera. And really, even leading up to this weekend, you could talk about what's happened so far could show how tough the road is in the Big Ten. But then, Michigan goes up and beats Michigan State in East Lansing. You've seen Northwestern win in Bloomington against Indiana. So what you're finding is some of that talent level in the middle of the conference down toward the bottom is maybe better than what people thought. While Michigan has separated themselves record-wise, they've not been out without some close scares. So what you're seeing really is just, number one, how tough it is to go on the road. And if you aren't able to make plays late in the games when you have to, like Ohio State had happen in that 4-game losing streak, that'll jump them against you. But getting a win was big, especially against an Illinois team that had also lost 4 in a row, now has lost 6 in a row. A team that's got a lot of athletes and is probably better than what their record shows. It was big for Ohio State.
And look at this. The one thing you mentioned, Keels, is no one's really separated themselves at the top significantly. The Big Ten last year was so highly acclaimed. There's probably 4 or 5 teams you looked at. Those are Final Four quality teams. I don't know if you have that this year, but I said you might have 9 or 10 teams you think these guys are all in contention for making the tournament at the end of the year. I mean, a game or two here or there, they'll have the chance to play their way in. And then the other thing you touched on, making plays down the stretch. And this is something over that 4-game skid, outside of the Michigan State game because they were coming from way back and playing their way back into it. But it seemed like, around the 6 to 4 minute mark right there, the game, Ohio State would be in the game. They'd be in control of it a little bit, playing well, and then things would start to slip away. A bad turnover, a couple bad defensive series, a bad shot. And looking back last season and earlier this year, that never really happened. They seemed to turn it up and really hone in at the end of the game and win a lot of those close games. What did you think the change may have been with that happening from earlier this season to last season to now?
Well, to your first point, Bobby, you think about the Michigan State game and the Nebraska game. Michigan State, they come from 17 down. Nebraska, they come from 14 down. You use up so much energy to get back into it that maybe you don't have something there. But then the other thing you brought up is in the last 2 games of those streak, at Minnesota and at Nebraska, you saw this team commit turnovers at crucial times that you're not used to seeing. Aaron Kraft, Shannon Scott, Lenzel Smith. You're not used to seeing those guys do that. So there was more care taken with the basketball. What you saw in the comebacks that they made in the losses and in what happened last Thursday against Illinois. And it's a team that also really was kind of able to, because they were in control or at least around the lead, they were kind of able to dictate not so much pace, but just kind of dictate the feel of the game to Illinois. And you kind of saw, and think back, too, to Illinois' game. Rayvonte Rice, their leading scorer. Now, he's finding an injury, but he didn't get a single point. Think about how frantic that would make Ohio State if their top scorer or scorers, which we've seen happen, struggle to score.
Paul Keels joined us now, the voice of the Buckeyes, talking Buckeye hoops. They'll take on Penn State on Wednesday at home before embarking on that big road trip to Madison and Iowa City. When you think about it right now, there was a big call for a shakeup. We talked about it on our show, whether he'd play differently, take the backcourt away with Shannon and Aaron, not playing at the same time. He started some things, but he really went back to what he knows and what he believes this team can win best with. Is that it? They're just locked in on what they're going to do now?
I believe so. The only real change you've seen was that second half in Nebraska where they went small. But they did a lot of that in the last half of last year, and in the NCAA tournament is also. Really, what other options do you have? I know there's the thought maybe play Mark Loving a little bit more, but when you've got experience, that's something you want to lean toward. And obviously the big vacuum at times is the lack of what they're getting from the center position, and you really saw that become a factor against Nebraska with the rebounding count getting lopsided. But I don't know what there is. And, Sam Thompson plays starter minutes, even though he doesn't start. There certainly is something to when you can have somebody come off the bench and give you some contributions, the way Sam has done, the way Mark Loving has done at times. So I don't know really at this point what other option there is, but also think about it from this standpoint. If you're Thad Matta and you're that coaching staff, okay, Amir Williams hasn't given you what you'd like to see. But you still have to play with him. You've still got to keep this guy mentally engaged. Whether it's Lenzel Smith struggling to shooting the ball, and he got out of that on Thursday a little bit, you still have to keep him engaged. So, last week on the call-in show, Thad Matta talked about how he quickly went out and bought a book on shooting and was kind of in Nebraska reading it in a hurry and relaying it to some of the players. And we could even see some of what he was doing in the shoot-around prior to that game. But it's all about confidence, and that's one of the great things that Thad Matta and his staff have done over 10 years. When something bad happens, whether it's a losing streak, a bad play, it's gone. You can't do anything about it. We all know that. But he and his staff are so good about focusing on what it is that they can take care of next.
You mentioned Amir Williams, and the lineup's going small a little bit at times. To me, looking at this line, there really isn't another viable option. Amir Williams, and looking around the Big Ten, you have to be able to go big against certain teams. You look at Purdue, Michigan State, Wisconsin, you've got to be able to match up. McDonald, he's a good player. Loving. They put LaQuinton Ross down the post, but none of those guys really have that presence down there. Not that Amir does, but they don't even possess some of the physical attributes that you need to bang down low. So would it be safe to say that, this team may go as far as Amir Williams takes them?
At times. And Bobby, really, when you think about it, you don't need Amir to do an awful lot on this basketball team. Grab some rebounds, block some shots, be a threat blocking shots. And one of the things that we saw from him early in the season that was the improvement from last year, and you guys asked about what was the improvement. You saw Amir Williams better at catching the ball when it was thrown to him and trying to do some things. When this losing streak started, that was something he was struggling with a little bit. But he's a guy that can be a factor. Everybody talks about the loss of Deshaun Thomas from last year. Think about the loss of Evan Ravenel now and what that is, his role that really isn't there at times for this basketball team. But let's also, too, for those who wanted to get up on the bridge and think about taking the plunge, let's remember what this team did last year, even later in this season when they got on that streak where they won 11 in a row. And when you look at how the conference schedule played out, 4 of the first 6 on the road. They'll finish with 4 of the last 6 at home. You get Michigan once, but you get them here in Columbus. You don't have to go to Ann Arbor. The challenge is that you get Wisconsin only once, and it's in Madison. You get Indiana only once, and it's in Bloomington, but Indiana's kind of up and down. But, there's still some hay to be made, and also, most importantly, too, you get some of these teams in the Big Ten Conference on a neutral site in Indianapolis, there's another opportunity to try and generate some momentum.
Kills, do you think the early success in them having that number 3 ranking, maybe not in the Michigan State game, but possibly Iowa, Minnesota, that comes into play later in the game? You get a little tight and something can happen there?
And we talked about before, Bob and Anthony, that early ranking had to do with being unbeaten, and it had to do with reputation, and that's a great thing. But this is a team that, for the first time in a while, Thad Matta's got 2 key seniors playing in key roles in Aaron Craft and Lenzel Smith. That's something that they haven't had a lot of in his last 10 years there. So what you saw in the Notre Dame game was guys with experience. What you saw in the comeback in Michigan State and the effort in Nebraska, even though they weren't wins, guys that knew how to do what it took. And, this is a team that's played in some tough road environments. They will continue to play in tough and road environments. That's why the Iowa loss hurt so much, although Iowa is, I think, maybe a far better team than people thought they were. But that's why that hurt so much, because you have an opportunity to take care of things at home and possibly balance some of the things out on the road.
Before I let you go, you feel like this team, do you have concern as far as the big dance goes, or are you hey, they're a lock for the tournament, I don't care what happened previous, or do you think there's still some concern with this team solidifying themselves as a tournament squad?
It's funny you asked that, Anthony, because just earlier today, just for giggles, and you guys may do this, I was looking at the way too early bracketology, and they have Ohio State in the 8-9 game in Buffalo against UCLA. And those 8-9 games are great games, but they'll make you lose more hair than we've all already lost. I wouldn't say they're a lock. I feel comfortable about possibly getting in, and I think the conference will help some of that, even though the conference isn't as viewed as maybe as strong as it was last year. But this is a team that's got the opportunity to do what it takes. If they can get at worst 8-8 in the conference, they probably get in. But a lot of work to do.